Let's talk about the true nature of some of these organizations. We have this story from Timcast.com. Black Lives Matter purchased $5.8 million mansion from friend who paid $3.1 million days earlier. Patrice Cullors described criticism of the purchase as racist and sexist in an Instagram post. According to a New York Magazine report, the National Black Lives Matter group purchased a $6 million mansion in LA with donor funds in October 2020. BLM took measures to keep the purchase a secret. On Wednesday, Cullors responded to questions over the cash purchase of the Studio City mansion, describing them as racist and sexist. She said that the author had a proven and very public bias against me and other black leaders. The expansive estate was purchased by Diane Pascal, the financial manager for the LLC Janaya and Patrice Consulting. The New York Post reported the property was purchased from televangelist Sean and Sherry Bolts on October 21st, 2020 for $3.1 million. Quote, LA County Property Assessment records consulted by the Post show the value of the two parcels combined, it's one house with two buildings, at $3.3 million on July 6, 2020, 3 months before Pascal's purchase. The value nearly doubled after the purchase of the property on January 24th, 2021. The assessment for the two parcels shot up to 5.8. Pascal told the Post he paid the asking price without elaborating further. Within a week of the purchase, ownership was transferred to an LLC in Delaware named after the property's address, public records show. Now, I don't know exactly if this proves anything definitively, but here's what it sounds like at the very least. There were televangelists who had a $3.3 million property. They listed it for sale. This guy buys it for the asking price, which the Boltz's, it was, what's the guy's name? I want to make sure I get, Sean Boltz said was $3.1 million. About a week later, the BLM nonprofit bought it for 5.8. Where did that $2.7 million go?
Right.
It seems like, just seems like
it went to fighting racism
that
and sexism.
a nonprofit pulled a shady deal to give $2.7 million to launder it out of a nonprofit into private hands. So it is now obfuscated and used for who knows what.
I was waiting for that launder word because that's what it
seems
does.
like.
It does seem like. It sounds like it's just a hint of, I'm going to go all the way on this. First of all, this BLM is a con game all the way down. It is a con game all the way down. They tore this country apart over the death of a fentanyl addict who resisted arrest. And the policing was bad in that story, but they tore the country apart. The police don't kill black people. The police are not prejudiced against black people. Black people commit an inordinate amount, let me put it another way, an inordinate amount of the crime, violent crime that is committed by people who are black. 50% of murders.
I think there's a better way to put it. I think it's poor people. And a lot of black neighborhoods tend to be impoverished.
Maybe, but the facts are the facts. If 50% of the country, 7% of the country are black males. It's not that 7% of the country are committing 50% of the murders because it's a small number. The majority of black people, of course, are not murderers at all. It's a small number of bad guys who are black who are committing 50% of the crime. That puts police in a certain position. That means you are statistically more suspicious when you go into a neighborhood and you're black. So you get, and it's very insulting and upsetting for a stand-up guy who's black to get stopped by the police for nothing.
Right.
But it's also upsetting for a stand-up cop who's also in the majority to be accused of being racist because there was a bad cop. So all I'm saying is this is a con game from the beginning. Their open plan on their website until they took it down was a Maoist plan to violently introduce socialism and destroy the American family and destroy, as they call it, cisgender sexuality. And they did it through riots. It's all a con game. And
specifically on their website, targeting the family, disrupting the nuclear family.
Yes,
but I would love to actually have a deeper, like a moral discussion, because I think we often don't go through it. I mentioned poverty, and you mentioned race, but right. I don't think you're implying that based on race they're committing more crime. Just that
I don't imply that. I don't think that's true at all. I think the left thinks it's true. I think that's why they want to get rid of bail and they want to get rid of policing, because the left does not think black people can rise above, and I thoroughly believe they can.
So the issue I see, having grown up in Chicago, having lived in New York, is that I agree. I think the stats are the stats that come from the FBI. I think it's tied to poverty. And then there's the issue of historical wealth and systemic racism. Now, often the right says, there isn't systemic racism, or we recently saw with Jon Stewart and Andrew Sullivan. Sullivan said, what systems, what systems? John had a terrible argument. I think Andrew performed poorly. Did you see that segment they did?
Yeah.
And so I would love to get your thoughts on this. The way I see it is crime is tied to poverty. And I think what we end up seeing with like FBI crime stats, it actually generates racist beliefs that some people believe race is the component that causes the crime. I think poverty is the component, and I think there are elements of history in the United States going back to, say, the 80s.
See, I would say culture. If poverty caused crime, Wall Street would be an honest place.
Yeah,
what poverty does, what poverty does is it limits the kind of crime you could commit. The guy who holds you up in an alley would happily write a check and steal money from a company without risking his life.
Well,
but he doesn't have that option.
Is it violent crime?
Is it violent crime? Yeah. So, but people are sinful. They're broken. They're criminal, and that is going to come out everywhere. However, the culture, black culture, has been utterly destroyed, and it was destroyed by Great Society programs by the left. Before the Great Society, before Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, black people were moving into the middle class faster than they were afterward. They were warned, the Democrats were warned by a Democrat, by their own guy, that these programs would foster single-parent homes and destroy the black family. It used to be that 25% of black children were born out of wedlock. Now it's 75%. That's more than when Democrats were actually selling their slaves, because all the slave owners were Democrats too. They were selling their slaves down the river to purposely break up the family. It's worse now. They finally broke up the black family. When you go into a prison, a Democrat will tell you, oh, look, they're all black and Hispanic, therefore it must be black. They're all fatherless, every single one. You go down that prison cell, you are looking at one fatherless child after another. It's culture. People are poor and honest. Most black people who are poor are also honest. They're trying to build jobs, they're trying to build a life and all this. But when you have no father, when you have broken homes, when each guy has 3 different baby mamas and all this stuff, you are going to have more crime. And that's what's happened. This has only happened since the 60s, since Jason Riley, one of the much better writers about black problems in America, had a book, and it was called Please Stop Helping Us. And that's what I think the problem is.
It makes me wonder about the Democrats' position before civil rights and how their position after civil rights still perpetuates serious problems in the black community.
Well, right, because, the Martin Luther King idea that you should be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin, has gone out the window.
I want to point something out. You saw in California, they were trying to repeal the civil rights provision from their constitution. Do you remember this?
Because of the fact that it kept them from doing affirmative action?
Right.
Right.
And so I had a conversation with a friend who is woke, and I asked, do you know the demographics of California are? It's overwhelmingly white. I think it's like 70% white. And I said, and do you believe that there are towns in California that are 99% white? Well, yes, of course there are. Do you think those towns, when this law passes, or when you repeal the civil rights provision, do you think they're now all of a sudden going to have an epiphany and recognize that they should treat everyone equally? Or do you think that those people, because by virtue of being white, they're racist, will be racist towards black people with impunity because you've repealed the protections?
Good question.
Right.
Yeah.
But my point there, I'm sorry, just is stop helping people, right? That's the point. They say, we're going to help you with these things, and they take away a provision that was fought long and hard for, civil rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, and look at the way Democrats, the left, let's say, talk about black people. They say, well, we want more black people in school, in college, so we've got to lower the standards. And you think, really? How about raising the educational level of the crappy schools in their neighborhoods? What would that be like?
Or giving them school choice.
So
they can decide where to send their kids to school
instead
of
Obama
supporting
just
failing
gutted
public
that.
schools.
Yes, the Democrats continually gut that.
But this is the problem. When it comes to, we have a lot of problems. I'll give you my perspective from Chicago. Racial segregation is the norm in Chicago, mostly by choice, but still the remnants of blockbusting and redlining. So redlining is when they said, the real estate companies or whatever, they would draw out areas where they're like, we'll only move certain people of certain races, black people in these areas near the red line. And so you end up with enclaves. There's actually, where I grew up, 47th Street, 47 South. When you cross it to the north, it becomes an entirely black community. To the south, it's fairly mixed, a lot of Polish immigrants. And what happens is the remnants of those policies result in people wanting to move into areas where there's people of their own community. So it keeps segregation fairly entrenched. But then you also have laws that were passed that seemingly do the same thing. I've talked about how they had a Latino elotes carts, the corn with the mayo and stuff, and they wouldn't let them come to our neighborhood. They passed a law or whatever banning them from crossing one street. Just so happens that one street, once you cross it, all the ads are in Spanish. So I think you've got, in Chicago, a very serious Democrat problem. I personally think that they thrive on racism.
I totally agree.
They make it worse because they can weaponize it to win elections. Yeah. You end up with Chicago being run by Democrats for 100 years? With what? How many improvements have come? It's only gotten worse.
It's only gotten worse.
It's only gotten worse.
But you know what? If I may just, people like to gather with their own. This country, we forget what a revolutionary experiment this country is. What Andrew Sullivan said to Jon Stewart was exactly right. I lived out of this country for 7 years. This is the least racist country on earth. That doesn't mean it's not racist. That doesn't mean there aren't racists. That doesn't mean there aren't systems in place that can be reformed. But this is the only country in the world since Rome, since the Roman Empire, where we say, if you come over, you are an American. You come here, you're an American. Doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter where you come from. If you look at who is most successful in America, I think it's Indian Americans. Certainly Chinese Americans are successful. So it's not color, it's not skin color that's keeping people down. This country is amazing in its ethnic diversity. And when you leave places like LA and Chicago that are so largely segregated, like I'm living in a place now where there are plenty of middle-class black people, the couples are all mixed and all this stuff. And you think like, yeah, this is what America does. It has always done it. There's a special problem with black people, which is that everybody else came here to escape the oppression. They alone were oppressed here. And that is a huge difference. It takes a certain amount of grace to forgive a country for doing that to you. I think they're going to have to exercise that grace because it's the only thing that's going to free them from anger in the past. But it's a tough thing to ask for.
I think the solution is simple, and a lot of these woke people don't want to accept it. If we've already passed laws, we've outlawed blockbusting and redlining and other racist, overtly racist policies, then the solution at this point becomes class-based. If the left believes that the black community is disproportionately affected by historical racism and they're impoverished because of it, lack of generational wealth, then instead of making race in the law, you just say we're going to provide tax benefits, tax credits to certain families at certain levels, which we do, and then you will disproportionately benefit black families or
you got to talk about the culture too. This is the thing that gets me about conservatives here. This bothers me about conservatives. Everybody knows in America, and this is still true to this day, if you get married before you have children, if you go to high school, if you graduate high school and then get married and then have children, you probably won't be poor. That's just the stats. However, if you grow up without a dad, if your mom is addicted to drugs, it's a little harder to do that. This is the thing that conservatives forget about. Like, it may be a little tougher. It's easier to do that when you grow up in the suburbs and you've seen it done. White kids listen to rap and hip hop, which I'm sorry, I think is garbage. But white kids listen to it ironically. Black kids listen to it, and it actually affects the way they live and their culture. White
kids like rap, dude. Come on.
No, they like it, but they listen to it ironically. They don't think, oh yes, they do, because they go home and they see, oh my mom and dad like each other. They're not beating up hoes
But there's white people in these neighborhoods. I grew up from the south side of Chicago. Everyone listened to rap.
I understand, but we're talking about
white kids listen to Master P.
I understand that, but we're talking about
they weren't coming home to good moms. Like my friend's mom was a heroin addict.
I understand, but again, we're talking about generality and statistics, right? We're not talking about the people who do that. We're saying there is this problem of crime in black communities that it's not in white communities.
I think you're talking about class, actually, because you're talking about South Side Chicago, and it's the same as what you're talking about in the black community. So maybe it's just it's a community issue. I think the skin color is a false flag, that the consciousness of these people that are like the great-grandchildren of slaves or great-grandchildren are still poor, and so they're doing crime, and then because you see their skin color, you're like, well, it's the black skin color that's
Well, I agree with that.
But at the same time, you have these left-wing activists who make it all about the skin color, right. And as a result of that, they forward policies that actually do end up keeping the group down as a whole.
I would hang out, like I lived in Atlanta, it was real multicultural. I went down and lived on Normal Avenue, with a Mexican community, and I would think words to people instead of speak, because I didn't speak the language, and I could integrate really nicely. And I understand what you're saying, that there's a black community. I sometimes I push back on this because I want to believe that we're all one community as a species, but it's a lot of hugging, cooking, made meals, a lot of calling your mom on the phone. Like, that's not in the white. It wasn't really part of my community growing up. I mean, my mom wanted us to have dinner together, but it wasn't that like hugging love that I sensed in that community. Mm-hmm. So maybe I can concede that they are.
Well, you know, a lot of these problems exist, for instance, in what they now call hillbilly communities. And so, because it's the same thing, it's the same broken culture, and it's the same poverty, except they're white. So it's definitely not skin color. It's definitely not about skin color, but it is about cultures that do tend to accrue in groups of people, right? So, you know, if I took 100 people and put them in a space capsule, they would instantly become a new race, right? Because they'd sleep with each other, and their children would be related, and whatever happened to them would affect them. So it is culture, but because people tend to gather together with their kind, and sometimes, as you say, are forced to gather together with their kind, those cultures are going to look like a certain way.
Let's clarify that music point. You're specifically you're referring to like the gangsta culture music,
right? Not
rap as music.
No, I hate it as music, but that's my personal opinion.
Man, you know, I don't understand that. I think rap's great.
Yeah.
I know Ben also, he said like rap wasn't
It's not music, okay, folks?
I remember that. It was a huge controversy.
I like melody.
It's not even music, all right? Okay, don't even come at me with that.
I feel like I'm home.
When I walk down the street with my boombox, I'm playing classical music, okay? None of that hip hop.
Have you heard Handlebars by Flowbots?
No, and I'm not going to.
You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely gonna. It's basically telling the story of someone growing up and then eventually becoming a despot.
You know, I was in an Uber. Going and coming, one direction being driven by a guy, one by a girl. Both ways they were playing on the radio the same song, right? The same, I don't know if it's hip hop or rap, whatever it was. And the story was about a woman being forced to perform fellatio while they laughed at her. And I just wanted to say, like, you know, this is degrading. It's degrading to listen to.
But that's not indicative of rap. That's indicative of a certain kind of music.
Gangster
rap?
A
certain. It's indicative of a certain artist themselves. You know what I mean?
But if you have look
at Madonna. You know, I'm on my knees praying or whatever.
Yeah. But if you have all I'm saying is, if you're listening to that song and you have a mom and dad who treat each other nicely, that doesn't mean that much. It's ironic. It's like me watching a gangster movie. I love gangster movies. I'm never going to go out and kneecap somebody, you know. But if you are growing up in a dysfunctional house or a dysfunctional culture, a dysfunctional neighborhood, and you're listening to that, it may well become your standard for how you treat women.
I think, you know, from where I grew up, the neighborhood I was in was very multiracial, and that was a lot of the music everyone listened to.
Yeah.
So people weren't going home to a mom and dad who were like, you know, dancing on date night. They were going home to broken homes.
So how were the outcomes in that neighborhood?
I mean, I've had a couple of friends of mine who were white die of heroin overdoses. They almost all were in gangs, and they were white. They're all still very poor, and their lives are. Some people have found middle class living.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely cultural issues for sure.
Yeah.
And that's I think we definitely agree on that one. My whole thing is just like, rap music is not all, you know, just talking about beating women and doing awful things and shooting people up. Like, there's rap music that's very like thoughtful, thought-provoking, and
Modest Yahoo, for instance.
This is the only subject on which I'm probably more conservative than Ben, so I probably shouldn't get into this. You know,
I think you made a great point about the brainwashing power of media. It's massive.
It's massive,
and we're on a new environment, a new horizon of it.
And it interacts with culture because, again, you know, I can play a violent video game. It's not going to mean a thing to me. But if you're playing it for 12 hours a day and nobody's taking care of you, it actually does.
But just to clarify, when you're referring to rap, are you referring to about the content of the songs? What they depict.
Well, I also think the music is simplistic, but I think rock music is simplistic too. So I'm not the right person to talk to. But I do think the degraded lyrics are a problem.
But so that's just an issue of particular artists. Like, I mean, there's rock music that's also simplistic trash too. You know, with bad lyrics.
I agree.
Yes.
No, I haven't liked the song since like 1500.
You know, when it comes to hip hop, I like melody. It's melody, vocal melody. That's what I'm missing with hip hop. I don't ever get into it really.
You know, I have to tell you, this is absolutely. My father was a fairly famous New York DJ, and he played what was called then middle of the road music, which is now called the American Songbook. So as a little kid, I grew up listening to Frank Sinatra and Cole Porter, Gershwin, and all this stuff. One day, my father, who knew music really well, came home and said, "This new thing has come out. It's amazing. This band out of Britain called the Beatles." And he played it for me, and I was like, what, 8 years old, you know?
Wow.
And I said, "Are you kidding me? She loves you. Yeah. You're going to trade Cole Porter for that?" And he said, no, this is the new thing. I'm talking to like a 50-year-old man, you know. So I just stayed where I was. I went through the entire 60s listening to Sinatra.
I gotta tell you, I agree. I listen to music on the radio sometimes, like, well, now it's streaming services, autoplay. And I'm just like, this song has no meaning behind it at all.
Right.
It's just, but, you know, take a look at Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. This song is mostly gibberish.
I find a lot of rock. I found even a lot of. I mean, I actually kind of like the Beatles, but I found a lot of their songs incomprehensible.
I've got 2 songs to show you.
Have you taken LSD? That'll help.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I've got 2 songs for you. We'll show you. One's rap, one's not. We'll show you after the show.
All right.
You know, but
it is mandatory. You will hold you down.
Now I'm sorry, I can't.
And you have to watch Star Trek.
Oh yeah, we already did that to Michael Malice. He is absolutely required.
I love Star Trek. Michael Malice didn't like it.
Sometimes in hip hop, you get like when they're talking like this, you hear like the melody and the tone. You can kind of derive a melody out of that. Like the voice goes up and down when they're making their sound. And you're like,
do you like singing? Do you like Charlie Daniels Band?
Yeah.
Devil Went Down to Georgia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Best
It's a great
songs
song.
ever.
I love
written.
that song. Yeah.
I saw a funny tweet. It said, "When I was little, I thought that the devil and his demon band sounded better than Johnny, and I felt bad about it." And I'm like, but anyone who objectively listens to that song knows that the demon band section of the song does sound way better. The bass line.
The person who started the Salvation Army. That's what he said. Why should the devil get all the best tunes? That was one of the great lines.
That song's so good. I love that song. Devil Went Down to Georgia. I mean, I love the Futurama joke where it's like, wouldn't a solid gold fiddle weigh,
be heavy and sound crummy
and sound lousy?
Let's talk about this story too, because
I want to mention one thing really quickly about this story, because we strayed from it a bit, but I just wanted to make a quick point. I think it is poetically beautiful that the house was purchased from televangelists, because BLM, they are the exact same thing. It is a modern iteration. They're the holy people who everyone knows are grifters and hacks, and every normal person rolls their eyes at, but for some reason have esteem and legitimacy because they claim to be fighting for a good cause.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.